The dawn over the plains of Gaugamela arrived with an eerie quiet, a stillness that felt less like tranquility and more like the world holding its breath. A faint haze shimmered across the desert horizon as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the uneven terrain, illuminating the ground that would soon be convulsed by the thundering passage of countless feet, hooves, and wheels, as well as the brutal clash of bronze and iron. But for now, silence reigned, a silence pregnant with expectation, fear, ambition, and the unspoken understanding that the day's events would resonate for centuries to come. Before we get into the main content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving a like, leaving a comment, and share to support me in bringing more great videos to you. Thank you so much. Upon a small rise overlooking the plain stood Alexander of Macedon, his cloak billowing in the early morning wind. Though still a young man, his presence exuded an aura as though he were sculpted from an ancient era, a profound sense of certainty and destiny that distinguished him even among his closest confidants. His piercing, unwavering gaze swept across the battlefield, meticulously prepared by his adversary, King Darius III of Persia. Alexander keenly observed every flattened patch of earth, painstakingly smoothed by Persian laborers throughout the night to ensure the unimpeded passage of side chariots. He noted the vastness of the Persian ranks, stretching beyond the comfortable reach of the eye. Yet, he harbored no doubt, something he had never permitted himself. Behind him, the Macedonian camp slowly stirred to life. Veterans of Granicus and Issus, seasoned by battle, quietly and routinely adjusted their armor, speaking little, knowing their king would demand their utmost today. The companion cavalry meticulously polished their sarissas, the formidable Macedonian pikes, and tightened the saddle straps on their mounts. The phalanx, the unflinching backbone of Alexander's army, assembled in orderly rows, their long pikes forming a dense forest even when pointed skyward. Athenians, Thessalians, Thracians, and Greek mercenaries moved with practiced precision. Fear was present, yes, but so was unwavering faith. Faith in the man leading them, a man who had never displayed doubt, never wavered, never faltered. In stark contrast, the Persian camp was a cacophony of activity. Trumpets blared. Horses impatiently stamped the ground. Charioteers tested the sides affixed to their wheels, ensuring their lethal sharpness. War elephants, brought from the empire's far eastern provinces, swayed nervously, their handlers attempting to calm them with urgent whispers. Darius had amassed a force of unprecedented size, a diverse array of nations, languages, armor, and combat doctrines. His soldiers believed they fought not merely for their king, but for the survival of an empire that spanned from the Nile to the Industry. Yet, even among the Persians, doubts lingered. Alexander had twice shattered their armies, striking with an unpredictable ferocity that haunted their memories. Darius himself had fled the field at Issus, a humiliation he desperately sought to erase today. His pride, his throne, and perhaps even his life now hinged on his ability to halt the relentless Macedonian advance. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in hues of copper and gold, Alexander convened with his generals. The meeting was brief but intense. Parmenion, a veteran commander known for his caution, advocated for a more defensive posture, citing the overwhelming Persian numbers. "There is no shame," he murmured, "in letting the enemy come to us." But Alexander firmly shook his head. "If we hesitate," he stated calmly, "we lose our momentum, and we will not conquer the world by yielding even a single inch." He unveiled the genesis of his strategy, a plan that appeared audacious, almost reckless, yet bore the unmistakable hallmarks of his strategic brilliance. He would extend his right flank, enticing the Persian cavalry to attack, thereby forcing Darius to commit prematurely. This, in turn, would create an opening, a gap through which Alexander, always seeking a decisive moment, would strike with the force of a thunderbolt. His words resonated with quiet confidence, and though some hearts trembled, none dared to contradict him. As the meeting concluded, the soldiers prepared their formations. Dust billowed from marching feet. Leather straps were tightened. Spears and shields were raised. The entire Macedonian army, though vastly outnumbered, moved with remarkable unity, each unit understanding its role in the grand design. Across the plain, the Persian army unfurled like an elaborate tapestry. Rows upon rows of infantry stood at the ready. Cavalry units massed densely on the flanks. The side chariots gleamed ominously beneath the sun's rays. Darius himself took position atop a towering war chariot, surrounded by the immortals, the elite Persian guard shimmering like an impenetrable wall of polished metal. His presence was intended to inspire confidence, to provide reassurance, to declare that he would not flee this day. By mid-morning, the two armies stood fully arrayed, separated only by the winds that swept dust between them. The tension was palpable, so intense that even the horses sensed it, pawing the ground nervously, their ears twitching at the distant sounds of shifting armor. Some men prayed. Others stood motionless. Still others whispered to the earth beneath them, knowing that within hours it would be stained with the blood of thousands. Alexander rode along the front lines, his horse Bucephalus cutting a majestic silhouette against the light. He spoke sparingly, but words were unnecessary. The soldiers watched him, drawing resolve from his calm demeanor. He halted, raised his arm, and allowed his gaze to sweep across the faces of men who would follow him into the teeth of the largest army ever assembled. Then, in a clear, powerful voice that cut through the atmosphere of fear, he declared, "Today we shape the world." The Macedonian ranks tightened, shields aligned, spears angled forward. The companions gathered on the right, ready to follow Alexander personally. Across the field, Darius issued his own commands. Standards were raised. Trumpets sounded. The Persians began to advance, their formations shifting like the incoming tide. The plain, silent at sunrise, now thrummed with imminent violence. Each breath became a countdown, each heartbeat a drumbeat. The world seemed to tilt, awaiting the first step that would unleash a storm. And then, as if responding to a signal from the earth itself, Alexander moved, not hastily, but with unwavering purpose. The first steps of the Macedonian advance etched a line in the annals of history. And the Battle of Gaugamela had begun. The desert morning dawned quietly over the plains stretching towards Gaugamela. Long shadows cast by tents, supply carts, and soldiers sharpening their weapons lent a solemn stillness to the Macedonian camp. Alexander had been awake before sunrise, pacing along the ridge overlooking the vast, open ground where his fate would be decided. A gentle wind stirred, brushing dust across his boots as he studied the terrain, absorbing every dip and rise of the land as if deciphering a manuscript written solely for him. Parmenion joined him a short while later, his steps heavier and more deliberate. He had served Macedon longer than Alexander had been alive, having marched under Philip and fought in more campaigns than any other man in the army. Though age had slowed his body, his mind remained as sharp as a well-honed blade. "It's a broad field," Parmenion muttered, narrowing his eyes. "Too broad. Darius intends to stretch us thin." Alexander nodded in agreement, "And we will allow him to believe he can." Below them, the Macedonian troops ate in silence. They were well aware of the enormous size of the Persian host. Some claimed 200,000, others even more, though such numbers were difficult to verify. But sheer size alone did not intimidate them. They had followed Alexander through treacherous mountain passes, across raging rivers, and through arid lands where water could vanish in an instant. What weighed heavily on their hearts this morning was a sense that this battle would be unlike any they had fought before. Not skirmishes in narrow valleys, nor sudden encounters on open plains. This would be a clash to decide the fate of empires. Alexander turned and walked back towards the camp, Parmenion following closely behind. On their way, he stopped before a group of companion cavalry polishing their helmets. Their leader, Clitus the Black, rose swiftly and saluted. "Clitus," Alexander said with a faint smile, "I hear you've already formulated a plan to break the Persian left flank." Clitus shrugged, his dark eyebrows lifting slightly. "It would be easy, my king, if they would only stand still long enough for us to strike." The men chuckled softly. Even Alexander allowed himself a brief laugh, though a certain gravity lingered beneath his humor. He continued deeper into the camp, pausing beside the phalanx line. Thousands of sarissas stood upright like a forest of deadly reeds, each weapon nearly twice the height of the man who would wield it. The phalangites, sturdy and disciplined, stood in groups, discussing strategy or sharing quiet memories of home. When Alexander approached, they straightened instinctively, their respect for him unwavering through years of hardship. "Men of Macedon," he said, his voice calm yet resonant, "tomorrow we fight not merely for land, nor for riches, nor for glory that fades like smoke. We fight so that no king, not even one seated on a throne of gold, can assert that free men must bow to tyranny." The men stood silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. Then, like a slow, rolling wave, murmurs of approval swept through their ranks. Their sarissas tapped lightly against the earth, a quiet rhythm of resolve. Alexander walked on. At the edge of the camp, he found his closest companions. Hephaestion, his childhood friend, Perdiccas, fierce and uncompromising, and Ariston, who remained unfailingly optimistic even in the face of overwhelming odds. Hephaestion approached first. "You haven't slept," he said softly. "There was no need," Alexander replied. "Darius has chosen the ground. Now I must decide how to break him upon it." Hephaestion placed a steadying hand on his friend's shoulder. "We will break him," he said simply, as if stating an undeniable truth. Alexander exhaled slowly, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel not like a king or a commander tens of thousands, but simply a man preparing to confront another man, Darius, the ruler of Persia, the final obstacle standing between him and the dream that had driven him since he first rode a horse as a boy. As midday arrived, scouts returned with fresh intelligence. The Persian army was already positioning itself on the plain. Darius had ordered the ground leveled days earlier to accommodate his side chariots, vicious machines equipped with spinning blades designed to tear through infantry lines like wheat before a sickle. This news troubled Parmenion. "If they manage to break our formation, even for a heartbeat—" "They won't," Alexander interrupted. But inside, he understood the danger. A breach in the phalanx could unravel the entire battle. Still, he trusted his men. The companion cavalry would remain ready to strike at his signal. The phalanx would advance methodically, maintaining formation regardless of the chaos unleashed upon them. And he, personally, would lead the right wing, the point that would strike the hardest, driving into the Persian lines like a spear thrust into the heart of a giant. By late afternoon, Alexander ordered the men to rest. They would rise before dawn. The camp quieted. Fires crackled softly. Horses neighed and pawed at the ground. Some men sharpened their blades one last time. Others prayed to the gods or whispered farewells to loved ones they might never see again. Alexander retreated to his tent, but he did not sleep. Instead, he studied the stars visible through the tent's canvas. He had always felt guided by them, as if the constellations whispered that a path had been laid out for him long before his birth. Tonight, their light pierced the dark sky with serene clarity. Hephaestion entered the tent later and sat beside him without speaking. They shared the silence like brothers do when words are unnecessary. Finally, Hephaestion spoke. "You once told me you wanted to stand where Achilles stood, to see the world as he did. I remember. Tomorrow, you will stand where no hero of old has stood. You will face the King of Kings." Alexander turned to him, his expression resolute. "And I will show him that the world belongs not to those who inherit it, but to those who dare to seize it." Outside, the crackling fires slowly dimmed as soldiers drifted into uneasy sleep. The night grew still, still enough to hear the faint rustle of the desert wind, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft clink of armor as someone shifted in slumber. Tomorrow, all would change. Tomorrow, the plains of Gaugamela would resound with the thunder of hooves, the clash of bronze and iron, and the cries of thousands whose fates were bound to the choices of kings. But for now, there was only a single night of breath, of silence, of final calm before the storm. The night before the battle receded into memory as the first pale light broke across the plains of Gaugamela. A thin mist clung to the ground, blurring the line between earth and sky, creating an illusion of deceptive tranquility, like a blank canvas awaiting the brushstrokes of destiny. Beneath this veneer of calm, however, lay a tension so profound that it resonated in every heartbeat, every measured breath taken by the tens of thousands who stood poised to shape the course of empires. Alexander rose before dawn, his armor polished yet unadorned, the familiar weight of his sword resting comfortably at his side. Though young, He carried himself with the composure of someone who had dedicated a lifetime preparing for this singular moment. His generals gathered around him. Parmenion, his face etched with the wisdom of decades of experience. Philotas, confident and keen, and the officers of the companion cavalry, their eyes gleaming with resolve. They spoke little, for words seemed superfluous now. The plan had been drilled into every unit, every soldier, until it had become ingrained in their very being. Across the plains, Darius's army spread out like a living ocean. Even in the dim light, the Persians seemed countless, a diverse assembly of infantry, cavalry, archers, elite spearmen, and the looming menace of war chariots equipped with scything blades. They moved with the assurance born of superior numbers and long-standing tradition, as Persia had long served as a standard by which other powers defined themselves. Today, that supremacy hung in the balance. As the sun finally crested the horizon, the battlefield erupted in color. Shields reflected the golden light. Spears shimmered like needles of fire, and dust spiraled upward in gentle, brown clouds. Alexander's forces arranged themselves in disciplined formations, with the Macedonian phalanx forming a bristling wall of sarissas. The companion cavalry took their position on the right flank, near Alexander himself. Behind them, light infantry stood ready to counter the chariots, each soldier mentally rehearsing the maneuvers they would need to execute to survive the onslaught of whirling metal blades. The Persians initiated the attack. A deep rumble resonated through the earth, a low thunder that vibrated up the legs of every soldier. The war chariots were coming. Horses charged forward. Pulling carts reinforced with iron and armed with rotating blades designed to rend flesh and bone. In the distance, the side wheels gleamed in the rising sun, spinning like jagged halos. Alexander had prepared his men for this. He had anticipated that Darius would rely on chariots to break the phalanx. As the chariots surged closer, Macedonian infantry opened narrow lanes, allowing the vehicles to pass harmlessly through the gaps. A barrage of arrows and spears rained down upon the horses, the sudden pain causing them to rear and twist violently, sending chariots careening out of control and skidding into clouds of dust. Some chariots managed to reach the Macedonian lines, but they were quickly overwhelmed by disciplined soldiers who surged forward, dispatching the drivers before they could regain control. The initial Persian tactic had failed, but only partially. Its true purpose was not wholesale destruction, but rather distraction. As the Macedonian infantry absorbed the chariot assault, Darius launched his cavalry in a wide arc toward the Macedonian left flank. From horseback, the Persians appeared as a storm of dark clouds, churning up dust as they charged. Their objective was clear: to crush Parmenian's forces and encircle the Macedonian army. Parmenion braced for the impact. The clash was brutal and instantaneous. Shields cracking, horses colliding, spears splintering as riders tumbled to the ground. Dust enveloped the combatants, reducing the world to a chaotic blur of shouting, steel, and confusion. The Macedonians fought fiercely, but the Persian cavalry pressed relentlessly, exploiting their numerical advantage and superior mobility. Despite their legendary discipline, the Greek allies on the left began to buckle under the pressure. Meanwhile, Alexander observed the action on the left flank with unwavering focus. Every movement was crucial. Every shift in the Persian line represented either an opportunity or potential catastrophe. His gaze darted across the battlefield, calculating distances, directions, and timing. The phalanx in the center remained steadfast, but it was becoming clear that the Persians intended to stretch and encircle the Macedonian line. He had been waiting for precisely this moment. The Persian line, vast, wide, and sprawling, was beginning to thin in the center as troops extended outward to reinforce the cavalry assault on the flanks. To most men, this shift was imperceptible amid the chaos of battle. But Alexander, it was an opening, a crack he could widen into a decisive breach. He wasted no time. "Companions," he roared, his voice cutting to the din of battle. "Follow me." The response was immediate. The companion cavalry tightened their formation, lowering their lances and aligning their horses. Alexander positioned himself at the head of the charge, a sight both familiar and galvanizing to his men. With a sharp command, he spurred his horse forward. The charge began as a whisper, a soft drumming of hooves that rapidly swelled into a deafening roar. Dust billowed into the air, as if the earth itself trembled beneath them. The wind whipped past Alexander's face, snapping his cloak behind him. His heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the charge, each moment elongated and intensified. Ahead lay the Persian center, still formidable, but stretched thin, exposed, and ill-prepared for the sudden onslaught bearing down upon it. The collision was cataclysmic. The Macedonian cavalry slammed into the Persian infantry like a spear shattering a shield. Lances pierced armor, horses plowed through gaps in the lines, and the precision of companions generated an unstoppable force. Alexander drove deeper into the breach, carving a path toward the heart of the Persian army. Dust swirled around him. War cries echoed, and for a fleeting moment, the battlefield became a vortex of movement and sound. Somewhere within that tempest, Darius realized what had transpired. The young Macedonian king had launched a direct strike against him. Panic surged through the Persian ranks as soldiers watched their center collapsing. Officers barked out conflicting orders, frantically attempting to contain the breach. But fear began to erode discipline, and the massive army, usually so coordinated, began to fragment. Alexander pressed onward, sensing the shift in momentum. Victory was no longer a distant prospect. It was within reach. His wedge formation widened, splitting the Persian line and driving closer to Darius's position. The more he advanced, the more chaotic the Persian response became. Units trampled one another, horses reared in confusion, and archers were forced to retreat without firing their bows. This was the moment he had meticulously crafted through every maneuver, every risk, every step of his advance from Macedon to the heart of Persia. And now, as he rode to the collapsing line, Alexander knew that the tide of the battle was turning. But the fight was far from over. Parmenions' left flank remained in dire straits, and the Persians, though shaken, had not yet fully broken. The storm of Gaugamela was about to enter its final, decisive act. The breach Alexander had carved into the Persian lines continued to widen with each passing second. The dust churned up by the battle swirled thickly around companions, casting a mute haze over the sunlight, but the Macedonians pressed forward with unwavering resolve. The rhythmic thunder of hooves, the metallic clang of weapons, and the muffled cries of men blended into a relentless cacophony. Yet, amidst this chaos, Alexander discerned a pattern, a subtle shift in the balance, a fracture in the colossal Persian host. Reining in slightly, he stole a quick glance across the battlefield. The Persian center, once a proud and solid formation, now buckled under the relentless pressure of the cavalry wedge. Behind him, the companions maintained their tight formation, their discipline a stark contrast to the growing disorder spreading among the Persian ranks. Alexander could almost feel the tremor of fear rippling through the enemy lines, like waves spreading across a lake. But even as he pressed his advantage, a sharp pang of concern pierced the exhilaration of the charge. Parmenion, on the Macedonian left, the battle had devolved into a desperate struggle. Persian cavalry, relentlessly reinforced, hammered Parmenions' troops with unrelenting ferocity. Thick clouds of dust obscured much of the fighting, but flashes of metal and the silhouettes of struggling riders painted a clear picture of the grim situation. Parmenions' men were holding their ground, but only barely, bending, straining, on the verge of breaking. Alexander understood that if the left flank collapsed, the Persians could swing around and attack his rear, effectively encircling his forces. His breakthrough in the center would become meaningless, and victory could easily turn into disaster. He made a decisive choice. Signaling the companions with a sweeping gesture of his arm, he wheeled his horse sharply to the left, redirecting the charge. The cavalry executed the maneuver with remarkable coordination, demonstrating precisely why they were the elite of the Macedonian army. They surged across the battlefield, cutting through scattered pockets of Persian infantry and racing towards a beleaguered left flank. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of their hooves. As Alexander's forces approached, the scale of the conflict became clearer. Persian cavalry loomed in vast clusters, their sheer numbers overwhelming Parmenions' thinning lines. Yet, the Macedonian troops continued to fight with a tenacity born of necessity and unwavering loyalty. Their shields, battered and dented, remained held high. Their spears, though chipped and worn, still thrust forward with determined precision. When Alexander's force collided with the Persians on the left flank, the impact was like a bolt of lightning striking the earth. The sudden appearance of companions shattered the momentum of the Persian assault. Riders who moments before had been pressing aggressively into Macedonian lines now found themselves the targets of a devastating counterattack. Horses screamed in pain and confusion. Men reeled backward, and the Persian rider scrambled to adjust to the shock of the unexpected blow. Alexander plunged straight into the heart of the melee, his presence instantly recognized by friend and foe alike. His sword flashed as he cut down a Persian rider who lunged toward him. With each strike, he rallied the Macedonians around him, transforming a near collapse into a powerful resurgence of strength. Parmenian's troops, invigorated by the arrival of reinforcements, surged forward with renewed vigor. The line stabilized. But across the field, Darius watched this dramatic shift unfold with growing alarm. From atop his tall, ornate chariot, he witnessed the collapse of his center, the faltering of his cavalry, and the sudden resurgence of Macedonian strength on the left flank. His vast army, once so orderly and confident, now rippled with confusion. Orders carried across the battlefield were twisted by the surrounding chaos. Units drifted out of position, and fear, once a distant prospect, began to seep into the disciplined formations of the Persian elite. Though the swirling dust obscured his view, Darius knew exactly where Alexander was. He could sense the momentum of the young king's charge. The inexorable pull of a commander whose strategic brilliance and unyielding courage had brought him dangerously close to the heart of the Persian Empire. For a brief, fleeting moment, Darius felt the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The fate of his vast empire rested on the decisions he made in that very hour. He made one, a decision that would echo through the ages. The great king commanded his chariot to withdraw. At first, the movement was subtle, a slight shift backward as he attempted to reposition himself away from immediate danger. But the soldiers nearby, already unnerved by the surrounding chaos, interpreted his actions differently. They saw their king, the man long believed to be divinely appointed, retreating. And perception, in the tumultuous environment of battle, was as powerful as truth. Whispers turned into shouts, and shouts quickly devolved into panic. The panic spread like wildfire. Units nearest to the royal chariot faltered, beginning its retreat as if a full withdrawal had been commanded. This sudden movement sowed confusion. Many Persian soldiers, unsure what was happening, deserted their posts. The initial ripple of retreat transformed into a wave, then a cascade. Quickly, entire segments of the Persian army crumbled inward, their formations dissolving as fear overwhelmed discipline. Alexander witnessed this almost immediately. Engaged in fierce combat on the left flank, he noticed the Persian center disintegrating, the royal standard being pulled back, and the unmistakable signs of a mass rout. A realization struck him with fierce, electric clarity. This was a defining moment. To secure victory, he needed to strike not just at the individual soldiers, but at the very heart and morale of the Persian army. He rallied the companions once more, raising his sword high for all to see. "With me," he roared, his voice cutting to the din of battle like a beacon. The cavalry, battle-worn but resolute, reformed their ranks. As they charged forward again, Alexander steered them toward the epicenter of the Persian retreat, aiming directly for the location where Darius had been positioned. The charge was akin to a hammer blow against brittle glass. Already demoralized, Persian soldiers scattered before the onslaught of the Macedonian cavalry. Some turned and fled outright, while others attempted to resist, but were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer force and speed of the attack. Alexander's relentless advance sliced the Persian lines, amplifying the chaos and accelerating their collapse. Yet, even in the exhilaration of the charge, Alexander knew that he could not reach Darius. At least, not yet. The Persian king, shielded by a contingent of elite cavalry, had already begun his escape from the field. A plume of dust billowed behind his chariot like a dark cloud, marking the hasty retreat of a ruler who understood that remaining meant capture or worse. Still, the Macedonians pressed onward, relentlessly targeting the units surrounding Darius's former position. Each strike further eroded Persian morale. Each maneuver widened the breach in their lines, and each passing moment brought the battle closer to an inevitable conclusion. By late afternoon, the battlefield of Gaugamela bore no resemblance to an organized conflict. It had become a chaotic scene of desperate resistance mixed with panic flight, of isolated Persian units surrounded by the ever-tightening grip of the Macedonian forces. Alexander, his armor stained with blood, but his spirit unbroken, only slowed his advance when it was clear that the Persian army no longer posed a credible threat. Victory had been forged, not through a single decisive action, but through countless coordinated decisions, calculated risks, and acts of extraordinary courage. And yet, he knew that this was not the ultimate end. Gaugamela had merely unlocked the gates to something far greater. The world itself was on the cusp of transformation. The dawn following the battle cast an eerie stillness over the plains of Gaugamela, where, just hours before, tens of thousands had screamed, clashed, fallen, and thundered across the dust-choked earth. Now there was only a haunting silence, punctuated occasionally by the faint groans of the wounded or the soft footfalls of Macedonian soldiers gathering their dead. And at the center of this suddenly quieted world stood Alexander, no longer the fiery commander in mid-charge, but a young man who had witnessed a lifelong dream spread its wings and take flight, while also comprehending the immense weight of responsibility that it carried. He walked slowly across the battlefield, the ground uneven beneath his boots, still bearing the deep scars left by Persian chariots that had failed to shatter his lines. The first rays of the morning sun illuminated the overturned earth, glinting off discarded shields, splintered spears, and piles of armor that no longer had bodies to protect. Men respectfully stepped aside as he passed, offering neither salute nor cheer. In this moment, victory was palpable, but celebration felt distant. What lay before them was the sobering human cost of triumph. Alexander paused near a group of wounded Macedonians. Some tried to rise at his approach, but he gently shook his head, gesturing for them to remain still. Kneeling, he spoke to them with quiet steadiness, asking their names, expressing his gratitude, and assuring them that their families would be cared for. His voice, low and soothing, seemed to reach even those drifting in and out of consciousness. It was not the speech of a conquering hero, but the voice of a leader who understood that men followed him not simply because he was a king, but because he carried their hopes and aspirations as his own. As he stood, Parmenion approached, exhaustion etched on his face. "The enemy camp has been captured," the old general reported. And Darius, he hesitated, unsure of Alexander's reaction. He fled east. Again, Alexander's expression did not harden. Instead, it softened with understanding. "He does what he believes he must," he replied. "A king tries to protect his people, even when it seems impossible." Parmenion frowned, his pragmatic and stern nature struggling with Alexander's words. "The empire is yours. His escape changes nothing." "Not yet," Alexander murmured, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where Darius had disappeared. "But soon it will." He refocused his attention on the field. A part of him recoiled at the thought of triumphing over a man he had never truly known, a king who, in different circumstances, might have been his equal. The tides of war had forced him onto opposing paths, but Alexander harbored no hatred, only a strange, quiet empathy. As the sun climbed higher, Alexander gathered his officers. They stood in a semicircle, each bearing the marks of fatigue, dust, and blood, expecting a tactical briefing, new orders, or even the announcement of a march towards Babylon. They were surprised by Alexander's opening words. "Look around at what we have achieved here," he said, his arms sweeping across the vast plain. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to every man who held the line, who trusted his brother in arms, who refused to yield to fear." His tone lacked both grandiosity and pride, resonating instead with deep sincerity. What we accomplished here was not merely the fall of an empire. It was the rise of our unity as a force. The officers lowered their heads, some swallowing hard with emotion, others blinking rapidly, as if struggling to contain feelings they couldn't express openly. "And remember," Alexander added, lowering his voice, "the cost of greatness is etched into this very land, visible for all to see. We carry the burden of every life lost, both ours and theirs. Let us never forget that profound sacrifice." They dispersed with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with a weighty sense of responsibility settling heavily upon their shoulders. Alexander had not simply bestowed glory. He had entrusted them with accountability. Later, After the bodies had been removed and the Macedonian camp was prepared for rest, Alexander retreated to a quiet hill overlooking Gaugamela. He brought no guards this time, only Hephaestion, whose presence was less that of a mere companion, and more like a steadying heartbeat by his side. For a long while neither spoke. The wind gently rustled the grass, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant fires. The sky above was wide and unclouded, painted in the soft golden hues of late afternoon. Finally, Hephaestion broke the silence. "It's over," he said softly. "What your father began, you have finished." Alexander leaned back, supporting himself on his hands. "It doesn't feel finished. You've shattered the greatest empire the world has ever known." "And yet," Alexander replied, gazing across the horizon, "I feel as though something is still drawing me forward, calling to me." Hephaestion smiled faintly. "You've always been that way." Alexander remained silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Darius deserved better than to flee from his own kingdom. He showed courage by meeting us here." Hephaestion considered his words. "He was brave, yes, but you were braver." Alexander shook his head. "We triumphed because our men had unwavering faith, because the phalanx held firm, because the companion cavalry moved as a single, unified force, because every soldier fought with the conviction that his actions mattered." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Darius's army lacked that spirit of unity, and a king, no matter how powerful, cannot save an empire alone. Hephaestion looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You carry too much of the world on your shoulders." Alexander smiled slightly. "Perhaps, but if I don't bear the burden, who will?" Night gently descended over the plains. Fires flickered in the Macedonian camp, their glow muted and respectful. There were no songs, no boisterous celebrations, only quiet murmurs and the crackling of burning wood. The stars above shimmered like faint silver wounds in the darkness. Alexander walked alone among the sleeping tents. His men rested because he had commanded it. Exhaustion had claimed their bodies, but their spirits remained unbroken by sheer discipline. They trusted him implicitly, a trust he felt deep within him, like a vow he could never betray. When he finally returned to his tent, he paused at the entrance. His armor, scratched, dented, and still spattered with dust from the charge, hung beside the doorway. He reached out and touched it. The metal was cold beneath his fingers. "This is only the beginning," he whispered to himself, not as an expression of mere ambition or overweening arrogance, but as a simple statement of truth. Gaugamela had not marked the end of his journey. It had opened a path to something far grander, far more uncertain. The world was vast, and the horizon beckoned him like a promise he had been chasing since childhood. He extinguished the lantern and laid down to rest. Yet, sleep did not come easily. His thoughts lingered on the faces of his soldiers, the stoic courage of the phalanx, the unwavering loyalty of the companions, and the haunting image of Darius fleeing into the darkness. He breathed slowly, letting the quiet of the night seep into his soul. And at last, just before sleep claimed him, he whispered a final thought. "Tomorrow we move forward, not toward simple conquest, not toward personal riches, but toward destiny itself."